I think the important thing to say about these two cases, these two BER cases with which we begin our study of BER cases, is that they are not very important. That is, the incidents which they describe in the lives of these two fictional engineers are really not very important, which makes them very important. Right? That's the thing to keep in mind. No, BER 01-10, whether or not this engineer gets a free skiing vacation, basically. And even 05-3, which is about returning emails, and is certainly, well, I don't know, perhaps more obviously on the face of it more important, but neither of them are very important. It's about whether or not you sort of get yourself a nice trip for free, basically, at the end of your education, and whether or not you return your emails and phone calls. I mean, these are not the biggest issues in the world, and these are not the biggest issues in engineering ethics, and that's why I chose these things to start with, because their comparative triviality points to something important. And I have, things to say about these cases in particular, the particular circumstances, the particular way that the Board of Ethical Review deals with the issues. And like everyone else, I agree with the BER in some cases, and I disagree with them in others, and sort of agree and sort of disagree in others. But the reason I chose them is because they're not about very important things, but that's important, right? That is, the idea is, especially I would say in 01-10, that it isn't the biggest thing in the world, but that's the point, right? Perhaps. That is, it's a nice introduction to the very notion of holding yourself to a higher standard of ethics because you're a professional. That is, things that other people might consider not even of any ethical import. You, because you're an engineer, because you're a member of a profession, because when you are acting in the guise of an engineer in your professional life, because you have a higher standard of ethics, because you have an ethical duty that is above and beyond the mere letter of the law, and be above and beyond maybe even the standard ethical customs of the community. That for you, things that aren't of big ethical import to other people are of big ethical import to you. That is, the decision in 01-10, this young engineer, to basically, well, that's a question. Is he taking advantage of this company? Is he deceiving them? Those are issues, that are questions that are open questions, I think. They're matters of interpretation. And the BER has its interpretation, and so do you. But the very idea that this would be an ethical issue is revelatory, right? Again, of that notion that the professional, and we're presuming that engineering is a profession, although many of you may not agree with that and may not want it to be a profession because of the ethical burden that idea brings with it, that professional status brings with it. But the notion is that you have to think about things seriously that other people may not have to think about very much. So the question about whether the engineer is acting openly, acting with integrity, acting without any deception or exploitation is a very serious matter, really, because they're an engineer, right? If it may be an ethical issue in general to non-professionals, it may be a real ethical issue, but its ethical importance is highlighted by the fact that the person who's in this situation is an engineer, is entering into a profession. The other case having to do with answering emails, it may be of more practical importance, right, than the first one. That is, if you don't get back to your client may suffer. But And that is true. You could interpret 05-3 as simply being smart about doing business. You treat your customers well, and you need to in order to prosper in your business. But that's not what it's really about, right? It's not about whether, if you don't get back to your customers, you won't have many customers, right? Or generally speaking, if you don't treat your customers with respect and solicitude, that you won't do well. But that's not what it's about. The question is whether the very act of failure to respond to emails and calls constitutes an ethical breach, no matter what its effect on business. That's really irrelevant, right? So, for a business person who's not a, a professional, the whole idea may be prudential, practical. That is, it's good business to treat your customers well, but you don't have customers. You have clients. Now, this is, of course, complicated by the employment situation of engineers who work for large companies and don't have that direct Sieghart type professional client relationship. But really, I would say that if indeed engineering is a profession, the people that you deal with, okay, the people who are buying your services are not mere customers, they are clients. And that brings with it an entirely different ethical situation. So that if a business person fails to respond to an email in a prompt manner, that's one thing. It has probably purely practical significance and no ethical significance. What I want to get across is that for a professional, it has both. It, of course, has practical significance in terms of doing business, but it also has an independent and isolated ethical significance because you're in a professional client relationship with somebody. Failing to get back to them in a timely manner has an ethical import that doesn't exist really in any kind of obvious way for the mere business person. That's the point of this thing. And probably true of 01-10 too, that if we're talking about somebody who is, I don't know, going to work in a non-professional capacity for somebody, maybe this isn't all that important, them taking advantage of the situation. But for a professional, it's of the utmost importance. So this is what I find interesting about these cases that deal with comparatively trivial matters, is that they point to, just because they're trivial, they point to the difference of professional ethics from mere, they say, business ethics. So I think it's a good place to start because it really reinforces the idea that things that are comparatively trivial to non-professionals are things that may be of the utmost importance to professionals like engineers.